there. I'm approximately on time, and I'm hoping that a few people will stop by today. Welcome to Leading with Class Streaming. I am Brie Sheldon, if you haven't watched before. Today we're going to do some Q&A from our readers and listeners. And then we're going to talk about apologies and accountability. If you come into the chat, I do love if you say hello. It's nice to know that somebody's here while I'm talking. But I'm going to start off with the Q&A question in just a minute. I'm giving some time for some people to pop in and going to post on social media to let people know that I'm actually live. And I don't know why my throat went from 0 to scratchy in like a hot second, but that's what tea's for. So today I want to talk a little bit about apologies and accountability, because it's a thing that we've been dealing with a lot in the community lately. And I do not plan on focusing on any specific people or their specific apologies. That's not the approach I'm taking here. But I would like to basically focus on how to apologize and what accountability is and how we should approach that from my perspective. So we'll see how it goes. I'm just posting that I'm live on a couple of different social media accounts to let people know. Because there are so many social media accounts right now. As Google Plus is dying, there's basically like I'm split up on multiple different accounts and trying to keep everybody aware of what's going on all the time. And some sites are easier to use than others. Like, I'm not posting on Pillow Fort or Plusbora on mobile because they don't have mobile accounts. So that does slow us down a little bit with getting the word out there. Let's see. If I could type things correctly, it'd be great. Just gonna check and make sure my video is going okay. Yep. So I see there are a couple of people popped on, which is great. In just 1 minute, I will start answering Jay's question. Jay's question that he sent in, Jay Foster sent in, was about how to deal with unexpected character behavior. And this is actually a really hard question. And I've been thinking on it since last night, whenever Jay sent it. I'm trying to think of how best to approach it. And it really depends on your specific goals as like either individual or GM, because like I try to use leading with classes not always coming straight from the perspective of always the GM. And that is because I like people to lead from whatever place they are in. Leading in place is the phrase that I use, and it really is important to focus on like the capacities of leadership for everyone, not just people who happen to be in charge. And so there are a couple of ways I would say to approach it, like, because I've been the player in the group where the rest of the group has decided to just do something totally different than what seems to be appropriate at that time. And I've also done that as a player. I've blown up some plots. So I think what I would start with is if you're the facilitator for a specific game or event, and players kind of go off book, what you really want to do is focus on how important it is to get back on book, and like what you can do to facilitate making that happen. Can you make a circuitous route and bring them back to the point? Or do you need to do something different to like change their perspective about what they're doing? Some of this is like a kind of failure of communicated expectations. At the beginning of your game, part of the reason why in script change I instruct people to talk about like what stuff you want to see in the game and what stuff you don't is not just about like content warnings and triggers. It's also about basically making sure that whenever one person wants to be doing something goofy, they're either doing it as a side thing or doing it in a game that accepts goofy. Like when people play turn is a little goofy in general, but I like to keep it to a limit. So there are kind of discussions we have in advance where we say, don't do these kinds of things. Like, don't think you can turn in front of other humans and be, you know, actively a shapeshifter whenever you haven't, like, prepared for that in any way. Whenever we're supposed to be hidden and it's supposed to be secret. Just because it's funny doesn't mean it's acceptable. And so that's why I try to have those discussions up front about the like boundaries and limitations of the themes and tone in play. So if, for example, Jay had mentioned if you're, you know, playing a specific type of game and players go from adventurers to spies, that is something that you can work on by saying, hey, you know, the tone of this game and the intent of this game is not for that kind of thing. Can we maybe bring it back to the center a little bit and focus like on being the adventurers we have set out to be? And I think that communication is like the number one thing. It is often hard to admit maybe that our plot isn't going the way we want it to. But communicating that honestly to people is better than keeping it as like a secret kind of thing that you end up being frustrated about. So I think that communication is the biggest part of it. Basically explain to people what you are expecting from the situation and why, even if that means like maybe revealing that you had like a plot prepared, because you want to be honest with your players and upfront. And if you're a player who experiences this, it's okay to raise the question to the facilitator and be like, hey, I thought that we were playing, you know, this like Lord of the Rings-esque type game, not something like Mission Impossible. Can we maybe reel it in? And it is the responsibility of the facilitator to step that back. But everyone has to be accountable for their behavior. So if someone really goes off book and it makes everything not fun for everyone, that's something that you have to have a conversation about. I hope that answered Jay's question okay. I'm doing my best. The other thing I wanted to talk about today, as I said, is accountability and apologies. So first I want to briefly go over what the differences between accountability and responsibilities are. Responsibility is a thing that can be shared and is generally task-oriented. It's based on the activities you're actually doing, the actions you're taking, and is typically more of a present thing, not as much a past thing. And it also focuses on things like roles, processes, things that you're doing day to day. This is like everybody has a responsibility to follow the rules whenever you're playing an RPG. If someone diverges from the rules in some way, then you need to have a conversation about that to make sure it's okay. And if it's not, then you stop. And I said here in an adventuring party, everyone is responsible for the safety of group and taking like turns doing watch, like in the fiction, and completing the tasks to take you closer to your goal. That's a shared roles and responsibility kind of thing. And accountability, on the other hand, it's a kind of mentality that helps you to take ownership. And taking ownership is about basically looking at things that are happening around you and being willing to say, okay, it is my responsibility to fix this. I am the one who has to be in charge and responsible. Saying things like, I know that, while we were playing, we kind of went off book a little bit and we aren't playing within the GM's, planned encounter now. A player can say, I'm going to be accountable for that because I was the one who suggested that we instead take the path through the mountains instead of the path through the mines, and now we're stuck in a snowdrift. I must be thinking about Lord of the Rings. It's just on my mind. But it is very hard, I think, sometimes for people to take accountability for their actions and take ownership of things that have happened. So I personally had a couple of experiences where I behaved kind of inappropriately for the environment, and I was irresponsible with my actions whenever I was at some conventions a couple of years ago. And afterwards, I felt really beat up about it, but I made the choice to own what I did publicly and say, yes, I was doing things that were inappropriate, and I think that, my behavior wasn't excusable, even though it was because I wasn't healthy and mentally well at the time. I made the choice to take accountability for that. And that meant publicly stating, hey, I'm sorry for what I did for anyone that I hurt that I might not have known I hurt, and things like that. I had to kind of accept that even if I didn't think that everything I did was super bad, other people might have seen it that way because my actions were inappropriate and ill-conceived. And taking that responsibility in the way I'm saying I'm responsible for what I did is the same thing as taking accountability for those things. We just call it the same thing a lot of the time. And I think that it's very important to, take accountability for the things that we do. And that doesn't always mean apologizing directly to specific people, but it does mean being accountable taking the kind of failure points that come to you after that as they do. If it means that you're going to be negatively perceived, you have to understand that that happens, and that's the fault of, your actions. And so it's very hard to take ownership of bad things. It's very embarrassing sometimes. It's very painful sometimes. Sometimes we don't understand that it's bad until someone tells us, and then we have to kind of be encouraged to take accountability. And there are times where accountability and apologies are being asked of people who don't necessarily need to give them. For example, whenever you are multiple steps of distance from the behavior of someone that was negative, you are not necessarily responsible for what they did, and you don't necessarily have to be accountable for what they did. There are complicated situations where I might say that someone's actions that encouraged or excused bad behavior is definitely someone who needs to be accountable for letting something get through, or by doing bad actions themselves. But I wouldn't say that someone who is distantly related, like having come into an industry or an organization late, or into a group or something, has the same level of accountability for something that's happening by a bad actor in a group or in a business as someone who's been there a long time and is well established and knows what's going on. Hello to everyone who has stopped in. Please feel free to say hi. I am a little scratchy throated today. I do apologize. I'll actually be posting all of these links and this document here onto the Patreon at patreon.com/leadingwithclass sometime later today. And that way people can download it, review the articles that I've synthesized for all of this, and, check them out on their own. Hey, Names Equipped. Nice to see you. Next, we're going to talk about the harder part of this, I think, than even saying, yes, I'm responsible, and yes, I'm accountable. A lot of us like to put on our paladin suits and be like, yeah, I will totally be accountable for my actions. But when it comes to actually genuinely apologizing, we fall apart. And that's because apologies are actually super hard. They're really difficult. And I have made many apologies, actually. Both from my own actions and on behalf of the actions of others, for letting actions happen, all sorts of things. I have inadvertently brought somebody who is known for harassing into a social environment with other people and had to be corrected. And this was at a convention, a specific public event. I had found this person who was really nice to me, super nice to me, and I thought they were great. And I brought them to a casual sit down at the bar at a convention with a couple of people who rapidly left the conversation. And I got worried, so I went to check on them because I felt accountable for making them uncomfortable. And I found out that the person that I had brought had been known for harassing people and making them uncomfortable. And I had to take responsibility in that accountable way. And I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry that I brought them into this environment, and I won't let them be here in the future. And before I had even left to go apologize, I specifically told the person that I didn't want to talk to them anymore, and I wasn't sure why my friends were uncomfortable with them, but I trust my friend's judgment. And it was a really hard thing to do. It was also a risky thing to do because I was at that point alone with the person at a con at night at the bar. But I made those choices. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you apologize, the do's and don'ts, kind of, because I feel like we're running into a lot of hiccups with that in the process of apologizing for things that have happened recently and that have happened over the years. I've synthesized this from multiple sources plus my own experience, and I'm just going to talk through it. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, as I am happy to respond to them. I'm just trying to basically, like, I'm trying to give some guidelines that might be helpful as we go forward, because we talk about, how there are missing stairs in the community, and some have been rooted out. Like, that's great. We have identified a few. But there are more. And a lot of us are going to have a lot more apologies to come. So, with that in mind, I'm going to talk about these do's and don'ts of mine. And these are synthesized, like I said, from multiple sources and my own experience. So, the first things that I wanted to talk about is how we should not be surprised if we can't see from another person's perspective or walk in their shoes. So, I said, don't be surprised or see the offense as invalid if you can't see from someone else's point of view or walk in their shoes. This is especially true, like I say, with offenses against marginalized people. You may be actually completely incapable of imagining their pain or experience, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. And instead, you should focus on correcting the action. And the big thing that this is important to think about is we have a tendency to invalidate the experiences of people who are not like us. For example, as a white person, I know in the past I have struggled with invalidating the experiences of people of color because I don't know what they're like and I don't understand them. And that's terrible. And I've tried to get better about that. But I had to learn to not do that because I grew up in an environment that taught me that the experiences of people of color were invalid. And it's unfair, I think, a lot of the time in games because white people can be a kind of punchy majority, and we have a tendency to erase the experiences of people of color in the same way that straight people erase the experiences of queer people and so on. And like it's unfair, it's ignorant, and I think that it is a direct path to creating more harm and less healing. So I definitely have tried to teach myself to not just take as valid perspectives that I can understand. Because I have a really singular experience. I have not had a complex worldview my whole life. I grew up in a very white place, and it was not healthy how I was taught to react to people of color, and even as a queer person now, other queer people, because I don't necessarily know the experiences of trans women, and I don't necessarily know the experiences of agender people and asexual people and things like that. So it's important that we make an effort to care about someone's perspective regardless of whether we understand it clearly. If someone says, "What you did hurt me," we can even still maybe disagree sometimes about whether the thing we're doing is a net bad or not, but it still has caused harm. So what we should do is recognize it and apologize it. I apologize for my actions that hurt you, and I will try not to do them in the future, or I will try to learn a different way to do these things. It's really important to acknowledge that other experiences other than ours are valid regardless of whether we can understand them or jump into their shoes or not. Next, the biggest do is actually apologize. Do apologize, and do it as soon as you see an issue. Explicitly say the words, I apologize, or I'm sorry. And do it immediately and in person if you can, but only if you are not a physical threat to the person. A lot of the time, men think that it is okay to corner women or non-binary people and apologize to them passionately because they really think that, it's important to apologize, which is great, except they're often bigger or stronger or more physically threatening. And this is especially if you're being accused of something like harassing someone or threatening someone or assaulting someone. You do not want to do the person-to-person, contact without the other person's consent, without probably a mediator, and without really being sure that they can feel safe. Because it's impossible to take an apology if you don't feel safe. I've had people apologize to me really aggressively and just been like, okay, I guess we're fine. Fine, we're fine. Okay. And this is in gaming. I've had people try to apologize to me by cornering me in the corner of a room and forcing an apology at me. And I would much prefer an emailed apology that I have in writing, and I can approach whenever I feel safe. So definitely do the contact you need to do to apologize as soon as you can, but definitely aim for ways that ensure the person you are apologizing to feels safe and comfortable and isn't going to feel threatened by your mere presence, because it is hard to see someone's goodwill if you're too busy wondering if you're going to get hurt. I think that you should always leave it open for people to come to you afterwards, face to face or in written word or whatever, if they want to, but never expect it or require it. You need to have this as an open-ended thing. Another thing is taking ownership, being accountable, like I talked about. Nothing that has to do with saying, I'm sorry you felt that way, or I'm sorry if you were offended. That is erasure of other people's experiences and is very harmful. So you want to use I statements. Things like, I'm sorry that what I did was harmful to you, or I apologize for how I behaved. And always frame it as your action, your behaviors is what is being apologized for, not saying in any way that they have any questionable feelings or perspective. Try to avoid the use of the word if. I'm sorry if you were offended. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Unless you are really just genuinely not sure. In that case, it might be better to ask the question, did I hurt you with what I did? If so, I'm really sorry that I hurt you. And approaching that in a way that is recognizing you are in control of your actions and your behaviors. You are accountable for those things. And whenever you are trying to apologize, you should not try and back away from that. You should hold on to it. Another phrase to kind of avoid, another word specifically, is don't use but. As in, I'm sorry, but kind of thing. It's a very quick way to erase what people are saying. It's a start to a troublesome discussion almost every single time. It's used to justify your behavior. I'm sorry I did that, but I really had to because, if I wasn't talking to you like that in front of everyone, no one would take me seriously. It's actually kind of like a terrible condescending thing I've heard in the workplace. And it's used to defend, but I'm sorry, but I had no choice. You always have a choice. Especially if you're a person with privilege. You have choices. So, you want to be careful about using words like but and if. They just so easily so easily, like, turn the tide into you pushing away your accountability. And that's not what you want to do whenever you're apologizing. Before I move forward, does anyone have any questions in the chat? I will give you a minute while I drink a little bit of tea. But we still have a little bit further to go. I'm like super scratchy throated and I don't know why. I was totally fine this morning. It's because I'm nervous. So, I don't see any questions coming through, but anytime I see one, I will pause to respond. So the next step is to do focus on action. You really want to, when apologizing, structure your apology in a way that focuses on the actions you will do to resolve the error you made, and see how you can make it up to the person or people. It can involve financial investment, time investment, personal behavior changes, among other things. Now, I personally, this goes into a broader thing for me. I don't believe in the prison system. And I speak about this occasionally. It's very challenging for me because I know just enough about it to know how ineffective it is, how abusive it is, and how it's focused on punitive treatment and not rehabilitation, growth, and change. And there's a lot of studies out there that you can find that talk about how jail often just leads to recidivism, which is like repeat offending and going back to jail, and stuff like that. So when people talk about what people have to do to be accountable and be, kind of punished for their actions, like what can they do to actually satisfy someone in an apology? What can they do to, really be given a full responsibility for what they did? It's hard because to me, there's always an opportunity for someone to, even the worst of someone's, to be accountable in a way other than isolation, punishment, and pain. We've seen the prison system do this on a large scale, but on a small scale, it can be very toxic to focus on, as recipients of apologies, just seeing the person suffer for what they did. And I know it is hard. But I want to talk about that here because from a leadership perspective, it is actually not helpful, it is not beneficial, it's not cost effective, and it's not useful to decide that the action someone take whenever they are an offender is always to lock them up and throw away the key, ban them completely, never entertain any apology. That does not mean it won't take a very long time for the person to make up for what they did in other ways, including financial and time-wise and personally. People have to change, they have to grow, they have to make a difference in what they're doing. It is not easy, I don't think, to accept apologies that feel like they are inadequate. And so we don't have to do it. But I do think that we benefit the most as leaders and as individuals when we can look at someone's actions and decide that there is a point at which it is enough. And people may have different markers for that. So whenever you need to apologize, it is okay to say to someone else, hey, what should I do to make up for this? What should I do because I messed up and I want to do the right thing? How can I fix my mistake? And it's hard, but we should really consider those options. I know that during some recent events, Someone actually came to me and asked what they should do for being a passive supporter and a passive permitter, kind of bad actions. And they listened to me, they did what I suggested, and, apologized publicly and took action. And they provided context for their choices, which was good, but they didn't try and justify it or anything, which was also good. And I think that the important part about focusing on action is that we have to make sure that the action is actually one that would be useful. We're just going to keep on keeping on and not make any changes in anything we do is not an acceptable response to any kind of organization or individual's choices to support negative behaviors, toxic environments, or anything like that. You should always be looking to change if you are guilty of doing something wrong. And we are all guilty. We all make mistakes. I've made tons of mistakes. Even in recent events, in the past, I supported people and tried to speak out and say, don't harm them and don't harass them because I didn't believe in it. But they used that against me. And I think that we should really be careful to ensure our action is as focused on forward motion as possible, and as considerate of the people we harmed as possible. Which leads to my next point. Don't be vague. Apologies that are vague are not helpful. They are not useful. They just kind of build up a pile that we can't shovel through. Whenever you are trying to apologize, explain what you've done, be clear about it, and address the point. So let's say, I'm sorry that I got too drunk at the party at Dreamation. I shouldn't have done it, and it was irresponsible. And in the future, I'm going to make sure that I keep to a 1-drink limit while I'm at conventions. And if there's anything else you would like me to do, I will absolutely do my best to take that action if it is within my means. That is an apology that says, I'm sorry, and it focuses on action of what you're going to do in the future, and it isn't vague, it's very specific about the offense in concern, and that's how you should do it. You should try to be very clear, because you don't want people to think that you're apologizing for something you're not, one, because that can undermine you. Especially as a leader, it is very hard to apologize vaguely and not sound like maybe you're trying to apologize for something that you don't even know you did. Sometimes you have done multiple offenses, and people haven't told you about it because they're afraid of you, or because they don't trust you, or because they think it's futile. You're not going to change. Why would they even say anything? So it's important to explain what you've done and be clear about it, and leave an opening for people to address other things by saying something like, if there are other things that I have done and other ways that I need to change, I'm opening the floor for you to contact me to tell me about them, but you do not have any requirement to do so. That's how we should be approaching these kinds of things. We should always be trying to be open and clear and communicative. And this next kind of bullet point is expounding on how you have to explain what you will do to change your ways. You have to explain simply and clearly what you're going to do, as much as you explain what you did wrong. And in this case, you can provide a timeline to give indication of how you're going to solve the things that you've done, and acknowledge your risk of failure. Say things like, I know that I may struggle to do this, but I'm going to make every effort to be a better person and not drink in public or harass people or you know, badly pay people because they're marginalized and I can get away with it. That's the way we should approach things. We should be honest and clear about the way we want to change that is the most effective. And, make sure that you note that you're going to put in energy and time and material investment, like financial investment, if possible. There have been people who have apologized for things recently where they also said, I'm also going to make a donation to a domestic abuse shelter. And that is a good way to do it, is to say, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, effectively. But you have to tell people, you have to be clear and communicative, and you absolutely have to say what you intend to do to solve the problems that you've caused. Even if you think that your offense was mild, if you have the ability, always take it one step further in fixing it. A lot of the time, people accept apologies that have action and financial investment involved much more positively. They will, whenever we're given responses from two people and say one person says, I'm really sorry that I did this and I won't do it again. And another person says, I'm really sorry that I did this and I won't do it again. And also, I'm taking these proceeds from this work I did and investing it. That's how we end up seeing people balance towards one person rather than the other as having done a good apology. Because there's something concrete that we can measure. We can say they actually, are willing to do something. And it doesn't always have to be financial investment. It could be things like, I'm going to donate some of my time to, make sure that I can help out at an abuse shelter. Or it could be something like, I'm going to raise my pay rates on my main page so that people always understand that I'll fairly pay out at least 8 cents a word, regardless of someone's race or gender. And that is something that it is the concrete action that matters. We have a couple more bullet points in the next 15 minutes. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. I absolutely would love to hear anything you have to ask. So the next point is, don't expect forgiveness. And we're going to look at a question in the chat real quick, and then we'll talk about that. Let's see. Names Equip says, this may come up later, but I was wondering if about letting an apology exist and not expecting a response or acceptance. Just in time. That was really good timing, actually. Yeah, so you should not expect forgiveness. Whenever you create an apology, whenever you write down an apology, you should not be moving in with the attitude of, I'm going to get forgiveness from this person. I used to try to approach apologizing that way, and it was really toxic because it made me feel like I was demanding something of someone, and also made me feel unsatisfied because I didn't always get an acceptance. I didn't always get forgiveness. And it is very hard for me to not get forgiveness. I beat myself up about it a lot, and I dig in really deep, and it's unhealthy. But you try, the hardest you can. But no one is obligated to forgive anyone who apologizes for anything ever. It's just as simple as that. So no one has to give you their time, let you in their space, or absolve you of your actions. They can hold that grudge forever, and it is their choice. And you need to allow it to be that way, or else your apology is not genuine. Your apology has to come from your own regret, your own accountability. It cannot come from needing to get a forgiveness from someone. And if you try to pursue forgiveness as your goal while you're apologizing, like I said, you will probably be disappointed pretty badly. Because a lot of people aren't going to forgive you. I have apologized for some big stuff, and maybe 1 or 2 people accepted it in some way and told me that. But most people just either let it go passively and forgot about it, or didn't accept it at all. And I think it's important that we kind of acknowledge the limitations of our own actions. Harm goes much farther away from us when we do it than healing ever does. So when you take an action that is harmful, it will impact 10 times as many people as when you apologize to all of them at once. It just doesn't spread the same. It's not like an antibiotic or something like that. It's more like just a tiny Band-Aid whenever you apologize. You're just doing this little thing. Just a little bit. And so we do have to sometimes just let our apologies hang out, make them available, and accept that may be all they are, is our own effort. Because no one has an obligation to us once we have offended at all. Speaking of how many people are affected by your apologies, I think that it's important to note that you should not apologize directly if you're getting in touch with the person would violate their security or safety, such as when you're blocked by them. And let me know, Names Equipped, if I covered your question in the chat, please. But hopefully I have. And we'll talk a little bit about why it matters whether you circumvent a block. You can always ask for a mediator, like a common person between you and another person, and ask them to pass on a message. It's sometimes crappy to do that. And I think that it can be predatory in ways if you know for sure the person really doesn't want to talk to you, but you still want to apologize to them. But you should really stay away from contacting people who don't want to talk to you. You can publicly apologize, preferably while masking personal information to a degree. You can say, I did this to this person and I feel bad about it. But you shouldn't do that if it's something like you sexually assaulted someone, because basically when we do things that violate other people's privacy and personal identity, anything we say publicly about that and in detail continues to repeat that offense and expands it. So we want to keep things respectful of the people that we harmed so that we can, reverse that harm at all if possible and try for healing at all. And making a whole new account on Twitter to circumvent someone's block of you so that you can apologize to them, which has happened to me, is gross. It's really gross. It's very uncomfortable. It's very disrespectful. And it's also violating. And there are reasons why we have tools on social media and why we have the ability to leave spaces in public and face-to-face. And those are for our own safety. So if you have messed up and you want to apologize to someone in particular, but you are blocked by them on social media or they avoid you at events, leave them alone. You can post a public and respectful and privacy-respecting kind of apology and leave out personal details or exact things that were done so that they don't feel completely violated again. And you can also do things like work with a mediator if there's any possibility that they'd be comfortable with it. And that's why you ask a mediator, hey, do you think they'd want to talk to me? This is what I did. And be honest. And if the mediator says no, then no. You stay out. And that is a hard thing to accept. It is hard to accept that someone doesn't want to talk to you anymore and that you can't apologize to them. But pushing past that is worse and more harmful. So always try to prioritize respecting their boundaries, even if it means that you can't get the absolution you want. The last thing is that I want to talk about, and then I'll have like 5 minutes of questions, is you can stand your ground and you should stand your ground if you're being unjustly asked to apologize. We see this a fair amount with marginalized people whenever people who are like cis, straight, white, and able kind of push for them to apologize for things that they didn't really do or like aren't really their responsibility, that they shouldn't be accountable for. Like, it's just like whenever, say, a newer person comes into the industry and we ask them to apologize for the pay rates that have been used by organizations for decades. That's not how we should be doing things. You don't need to apologize for being queer, of a marginalized gender, a person of color, disabled, or any other marginalized identity. You shouldn't have to apologize for being Muslim or being Jewish. And that doesn't mean that you can't mess up and be accountable. Like, everyone makes mistakes. Like, we all have things we do wrong, and as leaders, it is our responsibility always to be accountable and always to apologize whenever what we have done is wrong and what we have done causes harm. And you can apologize for the harm that you have done without saying that everything about you is wrong and bad. So you just need to make sure that, you know, you be aware of what your actions are and what they do, and be accountable when it comes to actions that caused harm. Like, it's entirely possible that the irresponsible things that I did at conventions whenever I was drinking didn't harm a single person that I had, like, done something big to. Like, other people, you know, did similar things to what I did, and no one complained. But the big thing was that I knew that some people felt uncomfortable, and that made me feel like I did harm. So I owned it, and I apologized. I said, you know, I'm sorry for that, and I won't do it anymore. But, you know, I think that there is something to be said for when people expect you to be accountable for things because of racist, sexist, and bigoted people's, like, perspectives. Like, if somebody sees everything that people of color in the industry do is wrong because they're people of color, then they're kind of absolutely going to like ask for apologies when they aren't needed, or maybe ask for more apology than necessary. Like, it's okay to say, hey, you know, the person that you're associating with has done some kind of harmful things, and, like, if you support those things, can you maybe reconsider it and apologize? But if you don't support those things, then fine. Like, we don't really have a problem. Maybe keep that in mind with who you hang out with. Like, I think that that's not that unreasonable. So, those are my do's and don'ts for apologies and accountability. And I'd love to hear any questions you have. I have to finish up over the next, 5 minutes. But I really appreciate everyone stopping by. And I think overall the biggest thing with apologies and stuff is that you need to be communicative, you need to be honest, you need to be accountable, and you need to take action in a way that does not cause repeated and continued harm. So, any questions? I'm going to have some tea. I know this is a really heavy topic, but there's been so much discussion around it, and from my perspective, I really needed to actually, voice it as someone who has made mistakes in the past and had to apologize for them. and who has kind of run the gamut with people accepting apologies, people not accepting apologies, and stuff like that. So I really appreciate anyone stopping by and watching today, because it is a really big deal, and we all have a lot to learn. While I'm leaving some time open for questions, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find anything ever. Just trying to basically save this question from Jay so I can make this into its own document and share it on the Patreon. Which, by the way, we always appreciate our patrons. As of right now, these streams don't actually get charged. This little document that I'm making may end up being charged for, as I, did do a fair bit of research over the last day or two for it. Yeah, I just would really love anyone who would like to check out the Patreon and maybe consider supporting us, because we do our regular videos as well. And we're currently working on one about followership, which is really fun and talks about an actual indie game. So I'd love to see everyone check that out. All right. Well, thank you all for stopping by, and the next episode that we're streaming is going to be near the end of the month. We are now doing streams on the first Wednesday of the month during the day and the third Wednesday of the month in the evening, so that John can sometimes talk about his work on Leading with Class, and so that he can be there to help me moderate chat sometimes, as I don't have a secondary for that during the day. And we will hopefully have the next episode out pretty soon, and you'll be able to find that on our YouTube page and also at patreon.com/leadingwithclass. We always appreciate your support, your likes, shares, and subscribes. We would really love some more subscriptions on the YouTube page, as we still can't get a custom URL. You have to have like 100 or something people to do that, and it would make it a lot more easy for us to share videos around and promote the page. But thank you so much, and I really hope that you will use some of the stuff we talked about today to go on Leading with Class. Have a good day.